Hello and welcome to the Leather Repair Company. As you can see here on this pouffe, it's the top off the pouffe and the seam is all bust and the innards are literally oozing out where the stitching is all bust. So what we're going to demonstrate to you today is to show you how to hand sew that seam back together again. Obviously, you're going to need to use a curved needle, as you can see here, where we're putting that through on the first stitch, and it's going to be a bonded nylon that you need as the thread to do that. So you want a good sort of thickness. Got to make sure that you leave a tail, obviously stuck up there, so that you can tie off the tail to lock the thread in position at the end. So you want to do it at the top and bottom. You've got to make sure you do that. Obviously, it's quite a tight process. You want to make sure that you go through all the existing holes that are already in this particular piece of leather, because the last thing you want to do is to create more holes, which is then going to weaken the structure of the material. And obviously, it's then going to be prone to maybe splitting rather than the thread coming undone, because if you put new holes into it, that will just create a weaker structure. So you've got to keep that as tight as you possibly can to get them into those existing holes. As you can see there, we're pulling that real tight together to lock that off, to give you a demonstration of exactly how tight that is going to go together, to see how perfect that seam is going to end up looking, just like the original. So as you can sort of see from this view here, we've done like a couple of stitches and we're just going to carry on going down the side of this split on this is the top section of this pouffe on this footstool. Obviously it's like a hinge lid on it, so obviously we've just taken this particular section off because it's easier to take the hinge lid off the actual main footstool, and we've just got it put on a table so that we can actually do this demonstration for you to show you how to hand sew this seam with this bonded nylon and curved needle. This is obviously just one method. There are different methods that you can do. You can use a double needle approach if you wanted, by sewing from one needle on one side on the right and another needle on the left and crisscrossing over as you go along and then pulling tight. With this particular method, you'll see when we get to the end what we're going to do. We're going to feed the loops through and we're going to pull the whole thing tight at the very end. Just make sure you keep hold of that tail. As you can see in the top frame here, we've got hold of that with our fingers. You've got to make sure you keep hold of that to keep that tight. Just keep feeding that through in and out of all the existing holes, making sure you do not create new holes, because that will just weaken the structure, as we've already stated. Obviously, there are many methods that you can do to do that. Like I mentioned just a second ago, there is the double needle option. There are other options where you can pull a long tail right through the bottom and do like an up and under and over stitch, a bit like a slip stitch, and then pull that tight at the end. So this is just one method of multiple methods that you could potentially use to fix, like a bust seam on the side of a piece of furniture like we're doing here. So any type of leather furniture that's got this seam, this can be done. On the actual top part of this pouffe as well, there is a section that we're going to show you in a much longer video that's going to probably be about 16-17 minutes long, to show you how that we can sew up a seam that's almost like a sort of false seam. It's got like a bend over on the top that creates what you can see there on the right and on the left of the top of our top hand here. You've got like a sort of almost like a beading effect, and there's one of those right through the center of the top of this pouffe, and in the other video that we're going to do for you, we're going to show you how to sew that back together again, because the actual stitching that you see there on the left and the right, that is what we call a top stitch. So it's actually a false stitch. The stitching to actually hold the seam together is a bit like this here that you can see that we're doing here. It's actually internally, and we're going to sort of do that, and it's going to be very difficult to do that because the top stitch is going to be holding that down. So that's going to be quite a complex particular video, is that one, but that will be one of our next videos. So we've put it on a different view here for you to look at, and you can see here where we've gone all the way along, showing you all the stitching, and you can sort of see whether it's nice and tight, where the stitching's nice and tight. It's not going to come out. And what we're going to do now is we're going to lift all these stitches one by one to pull them really nice and tight to close that seam up, keeping hold of that tail to make sure that tail doesn't disappear inside when you're lifting these up with your like needle awl or bradawl or whatever you want to call it, and just pull them tight, and that will just close that seam up completely and make it look like it's completely faultless and like it was, when it was built originally in the first place. It's just a matter of going along, and doing that. It's a slow process, but this way you ensure tightness at each stage to make sure that nothing is caught that could actually come undone in the future. This way, with this particular method, you're literally pulling each individual stitch really nice and tight at the very end here, as you can see. You could do this at the beginning if you wanted, but obviously as you're going along sewing, that could come undone and create additional issues for you, at the very end. But we're just going through here and picking out each thread, as you can see, and just pulling it really nice and tight. It's a very simple process to do. There is another video that we put up the other day, which is actually how to sew a bust seam on a car seat. Again, it's another great video. We use the exact same technique in that particular video as we have done in this one. As you can see, the sort of double loop tail that we're getting here is getting slightly bigger as we're going along. And when we get right to the very end here, we're pulling that through, and there you can see it's closed up and it's really nice and tight. And you can sort of see what the finished job looks like. That's really nice and tight. The seam's closed up and it looks absolutely perfect once again. And there we are, fully finished, the seam perfect and sealed up. Any information or help you need, leatherrepaircompany.com.